Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. So, we would come to find out that this movie is to just go on and just be really iconic, regardless of how I overall feel about it. It resonates to people this day. And it justifies to have gone on and had a movie franchise that had adjusted its titles at some point. Like, Honey, I Blew Up the Kid was actually kind of a funny title for me, and all the more reason to want to check it out, even though more than likely these movies are to be very simple but yet fun. So after the franchise, it seemed to have still resonated with people to justify a whole entire TV series. Of course, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the TV series. And I had gone on to watch like a few episodes of that, but uh, really nothing jumped out at me in its original airing that I felt that I needed to just kind of check it out. Um, really, like a TV show of this may go on and be more interesting, even though it may even be further stretched out than the actual movies were. But hey, like, it could be interesting to look into. If it seems that people are to really have wanted me to, then I may go on and check that out. But then also, here's where I have to go on and compare this movie. This movie would probably have to easily be compared to Ant-Man, the Marvel character. Funny enough, this is a Disney title, so it's just kind of funny how we have kind of similarity in that landscape of things. Eventually, we would both have movies where people are riding insects at some point, and we would also go on to have me compare this to movies that, like the Matt Damon movie Downsizing, which eventually takes Matt Damon and a certain number of characters and shrink them so that way they can save money, and kind of put them in these kind of massive mansion dollhouses, and just kind of put forward an interesting film. Then, of course, you would have the sequel to Journey to the Center of the Earth, Journey 2, with Dwayne The Rock Johnson. And we would have that movie play out that at some point in that film, there are animals and items that are just kind of in unusual sizes. And at some point, we would go on and have Luis Guzman, who is riding on this bee and just having a good time. Ha ha ha. Yeah. But then lastly, we would have to then go on and compare this movie to a video game called Grounded. Number of kids making their way into somehow or another shrinking themselves to then be thrusted into a backyard. Very much like this film, and it had grown to such a popularity that even Markiplier had gone on to play said game. So, after going on and saying all that, what is my real true opinion upon this movie besides it just being fun? In all honesty, if you don't have the actors that you have in this movie, it does not sell that well. Because I feel that the actors are putting on amazing performances, and this movie is to not have much of a story. Like, it is the most paint by numbers movie that I've ever seen in my life. This movie is to really just be built on, I think, ideas instead of a real actual script, it feels. But really, other than that, like, I can go on and at some point state that this movie is a thumbs up film. It's an okay movie at the end of the day. But like, really, I feel that the movie is too short. Like, I feel that like if this is to tell me like what they're doing with this first film, what's gonna happen in the other movies. Just be like, hey man, like are they really gonna go like and do something more interesting in sequels, or is it just gonna be a lot of the same? And having to bring up like even better actors for these situations to make for better films. But so, anyways, uh, this movie is okay. I would go on and tell people that this is a simplistic film that you can kind of take your brain and plop it off to the side and just enjoy the goofy adventure nature that this movie delivers. If you are just to be interested in an adventure film, but other than that, yeah, like it's a very just kind of plain flat film. Um, so with that said, I think it's about that time to break down this plain and flat film because there's not much I have to state or talk about this movie. Uh, Supposedly there is to be out there a number of people that are going on and saying that there's going to be some resurgence of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids in some capacity, somehow bringing Rick Moranis back from his retirement of acting and his musical career to then come back to do some project with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I could see that this could be like a handoff like project from Rick Moranis to his son. That would make a lot of sense to just be like, well, like Nick is to go on and be such similar to uh, Wayne Zelensky's character in a lot of ways. It's like, why not just kind of pass this franchise off to him and like either do just kind of like a full on remake with kind of the same ideas and whatever. Or really just try to create something somewhere new. But I just don't feel that they're not going to do something like that, like new, new for what we have for movies and shows coming out lately. No, um, like it's just a lot of comeback or callback or go back to um, something because I guess if something isn't broke, look into it anyways and try and fix it. Uh, but anyways, with that said, let's just go into full on breaking down this film and get into this movie fully on. Because also, as soon as I can possibly finish this review, I'm going to quickly try and watch Deadpool and Wolverine if I can figure out how to do that today. And take enough time to hopefully do back to back reviews if I can get this review done. Because also, I had a lot of problems for an entire day just trying to fix the app that I'm going on and reviewing stuff on, and don't even think that it's even legitimately still working. So I'm like, great, awesome. As well as also like the things that I've tried to do for an entire day um, to adjust this app. Yeah, it's not working. So I have gone on to like do uh, like emails, a number of other things to just talk to the people of the app to like, why isn't this working? And all of it is to be ignored. So that's great. All right, cool. So with that said, hope for the best and assume the worst. So with that said, let's go on and let's break down this film. Let's get into spoiler time. So, uh, normally when I get into spoiler time, I will go on and pause this review to whip out my cast list, and wherever I insist is to be on my phone to help me out, go through this film and just kind of talk about it, whichever. But let's go on and let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time is about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. All right. So let's make one thing clear. Within the IMDb, like the Thompson father is to be called Big Russ, and the other Russ is to be called Little Russ. And I don't feel that there needs to be like that in this film. or for me to review it and talk about it in that manner. I think I'm gonna go and call the father Thompson, and I'm gonna call Russ Russ, because also I don't uh like having that kind of critique of names because that just sounds freaking stupid. Of Little Russ and Big Russ, ugh, stupid. So, anyways, let's get into this film. So, in the very beginning of it, we have this mailman who is handing off this piece of mail to this dog. I believe the name is Quark or Quark. I don't know. It's a weird, goofy name. So I'm probably gonna just call him Dog for most of this film because it's easier that way. There's only one dog in this film. So we have both of the kids who are going on and being around the kitchen, and Amy is going on and talking to her girlfriends, and they're talking about their possible gossip and dating and whichever. And it's kind of funny how Amy is going on and like her conversation is going all over the place. That eventually, when she goes to hang up the phone, she ends up getting like having the cord like kind of surround her, and she has to figure out a way to just kind of get out of the cord. It's kind of funny. So Nick is building some kind of miniaturized uh, mechanism that looks like his father's shrinking machine. So he puts this thing together and is to turn it on, and this red kind of flash kind of appears, and the dog ends up looking at it and freaks out and runs off. So Amy then goes on and is to have this certain mechanism that notifies her father that breakfast is prepared. So we have Zelensky that is going on, and it looks like he's welding his machine, or it looks like what he's doing is some kind of welding. And he sees this alert, and then he goes on and starts typing with his gloves, and he states that he'll be down in 5 minutes. Amy assumes that this is minutes, but she's like, oh, okay, well, like, I guess he's writing with his gloves again. So Zelensky is doing all this welding, all this fussing with his machine, to then have his neighbor Thompson waking up, as well as his wife, to the frustrations of Thompson, just being like, oh my god, like, he's seriously working on that machine? It's the weekend! Oh my god, it's Saturday! So Thompson thrusts open the window and it's like, come on, Zelensky, give it a break. It's Saturday. So Zelensky is just so upset at this point that he wants to go on and confront Zelensky, and that leads both Thompson and May to get out of their beds. And so so Thompson ends up going to his backyard to accidentally trip on this tripwire that is to have all of these mechanisms that fire off this crossbow and hits him in the head, and he goes down. We have Ron, who has put together this whole mechanism because he wants to feel that his home is protected. So Thompson ends up going on to just be like, okay, like, am I hurt? Am I dead? Am I what? And he tries to pull the arrow off of his head, and Ron is like, oh, well, I super glued the end of the arrow. And Thompson's like, oh my god. So Thompson goes on to try and figure out how to get this arrow out of his head, and Ron ends up taking this this fishing reel that is attached to that arrow, and he pulls back to yank the arrow, now having his father scream in pain. So Nick makes his way to his father, just like, hey man, look what I made, kind of thing. And Zelensky is just like, oh wow, that's nice. Like, how about you go back and you help your sister with breakfast? Not having Zelensky take a minute of time for his son, but I guess it's lucky that his son is so well accomplished and so well educated. So to not take his son under his wing and just be like, hey, yeah, like, let me teach you a thing or two. Let me show you what I'm doing here. Nothing like that. Because Zelensky is just so focused on this shrinking machine that nothing else matters. So Zelensky goes on to turn on this machine and is to fire upon this apple this laser. And the laser ends up just exploding the apple. So the whole entire apple just falls onto Zelensky, and he's now looking at his dog, and he's like, well, I guess we figured out a good way to make applesauce, as he's on his thinking couch. So we have Thompson, we have May, and they're in the bathroom, and Thompson has just so heavily scrubbed any residue of superglue off of his head that May is to think maybe you've rubbed off a little bit of your skull. So the two of them are talking, having just a little fun time, and then they get out of the bathroom and realize that Russ is up. So it's like, hey man, like yeah, like I guess it's just a nick of time before you finally got up, right? So Thompson is going on and just kind of shooting the breeze with Russ about like, hey man, like how's football going, this and that, and May is just like, yeah, like he got kicked off the football team, and he's like, kicked off the football team? What? And so eventually they go into it, and so May tells Thompson that that eventually they found that Russ was just too small, and Thompson's like, too small? Like, all right, well, hey, like I'll figure out a way to just kind of beef him up. And it's like, yeah, it's not about that, because we come to find the later and later parts of the movie that he ended up like quitting the team, and so like because he's not into fishing and he's not into football. So, but we have Thompson, and it's like, hey man, like Russ, like get yourself together because the early worm catches the fish. Like, hey, let's go. Like, we got to get ready for this camp out slash fishing trip that we're going on. So back to the Zelensky family. So all of them are getting together, sitting around by the kitchen table. And so Amy starts handing out the food that is completely black. Nick does not want to go on and eat this food, so he even hands it off to the dog, and even the dog won't eat it. Both Nick, the dog, and the father all look at Amy. It's like, whatever. So Amy starts talking to Zelensky and is to eventually mention the conference, and Zelensky's like, oh my god, I completely didn't even think about that. So he starts throwing himself together, getting all of his items, getting this box of all this piece of paperwork, and he starts making his way out the house. Because again, this guy is so very focused on himself that nothing else really matters. And we have Nick who's grabbing this oatmeal pie, and he's like, at least I'll have that to eat because Amy's just making garbage breakfast today. And the oatmeal thing will eventually be foreshadowing to a later thing that happens in this film. So, as Zelensky is making his way out of the door, he ends up telling Amy, like, hey, if your mother calls, tell her I'll be back by lunch. So, Zelensky makes it to his car, and all of a sudden, Amy is to be picking up the phone, and it ends up being Diane, Zelensky's wife. So, Amy then goes on to like tell Nick, "Hey, get your dad because like mom's on the line." So Amy and Diane start having this conversation, like, "Well, hey, how are things going?" Like because Amy is kind of concerned that Diane and Zelensky are gonna like have a divorce or part ways or like something at this point, and like it gets further by the end of the film where like Amy has to go on and ask her mother, it's like, well, is everything all right between you two? And Diane's like, yeah, I think everything's fine. Like it doesn't really seem that they come to a head that like this couple is really just separated or something is going on there. Like I don't think anything is really completely said anywhere. but maybe I missed some thing of dialogue that states that they've kind of gone further and further apart. Not quite sure. But so, anyways, Zelensky makes his way back to the phone to have a conversation with Diane. And so the dog ends up getting his food in an unusual mechanism as Nick is to be trying to hand off his lawn chores to a guy named Tommy, or a kid named Tommy. So the funny thing about mowing the lawn is it's a difficult thing to do. But for Nick, like all he has to do is turn this mechanism on and kind of have this joystick of a thing that has the lawnmower basically cut itself. So I'm like, okay, like why does Nick have to pass the buck off to this other kid when it's just so easy for him to like be so far away from this lawnmower and not have to do any pushing or whatever. Like it just seems like a very lazy thing to do for an easy task. So we have Ron, who is very focused on wanting to throw the ball around. So he's starting to look at his family members and like, hey, like, do you want to pitch the ball to me so I can hit the ball? And like everybody's kind of off doing their own thing. Everybody's busy. Or Russ is just kind of reading this newspaper. So Ron starts to look around and then is even looking at Nick and seeing what he's doing. And like, hey, you wouldn't be a person that would throw a ball, would you? I don't think so. So Thompson is getting every single thing for this camping trip so well organized, even to a point of having this checklist. And so Thompson ends up looking at Russ and he's like, hey, Russ, do you think you can help me out for a bit? Russ. And so Thompson has to get Russ's attention and like this is all like Russ doesn't really want to do much of this because he's not much of a fish person and he's not much of a football person either. So but Russ goes on and does what his father tells him. So Russ starts to grab all these things and starts walking by the Zelensky home to see that Amy is dancing around her kitchen. And that gives Russ's like immediate attention. And Thompson ends up also like looking at Amy. He's like, what a weird family. And then he starts looking at Russ. Is like, oh, like you like this girl, don't you? Like, please don't end up with this girl, like anybody but her. But then I think also like he's finally looking at his son as like, all right, um like at least like there's something that this kid likes, even though it's gonna have to be that girl. Ugh. So after Russ is to drop off his stuff, we then have Thompson that grabs Russ and is bringing him to this shed with just this odd assortment of items that is to be the most like traditional, like everybody has a goofy shed with all these odd ballish items, and like only a horror movie would have you actually go into those sheds to grab an odd assortment of items to fight back from somebody. But a lot of times these sheds are just kind of useless in a film, other than just doing some horror thing. But so Thompson is talking to Russ and is telling, and he's bringing out this barbell that is so dusty, so decrepit, but I guess is to have legitimately been the only thing that Thompson really has at his disposal here to showcase to Russ. So Thompson is to go on and be like, hey man, like I wanna make you big and strong, and like for the next football season, like you're gonna go on and be this really muscular kid, and you won't be as small as others think that you are. So Thompson goes on and starts taking this barbell and starts to lift the weights, and he just so struggles with this one rep. He's like, that eventually, after lifting the weight, he's just like, oh, my back. So he then goes on and has Russ like, hey, try lifting this thing, and definitely lift with your legs and not your back, or you're gonna freaking hurt like your dad is. So after Thompson is to retreat and be spotting his cat, he's like, Spiked, where did my life go so wrong? So Thompson leaves, and Ron is now in the backyard with this baseball and this bat. And obviously, he turns around and Ron smacks the baseball into this attic and breaks this window. So Russ, who's going on and trying to lift this barbell with these weights on it, ends up hearing this whole commotion and goes and grabs Ron and brings them to Lazinski's household. All while we have baseball that has gone on to make its way into the shrinking machine, to then all of a sudden have this shrinking machine start to fire off and start to shrink the furniture that is within this room, this thinking couch, and so on and so forth. So Russ and Ron make their way to Nick and Amy. So Russ ends up stating, yeah, like my brother had broken your window, and my brother's going to go on and with his allowance pay for the broken window because he doesn't want his dad to know anything about this. And Ron is like, yeah, I don't want dad to know. So Ron ends up asking for the ball back, and so both Nick and Ron make their way to the attic. So now Zelensky makes his way to this conference. He goes on and he's starting to talk to these scientists about how like his shrinking machine could go on and make for fuel to be more plentiful and could make being able to like haul things off to space a lot more easier and this and that. So he's going on and he's talking about all of these benefits, but no one can truly believe that Zelensky is going to be able to make this kind of machine. And they just kind of laugh him off. So back at the house, we have Amy and we have Russ. We're just like, okay, like, where is Nick and where is Ron at this time? Like, they've kind of taken forever just to retrieve some ball. So they go upstairs to the attic and they themselves end up getting shrunk. So the four of them make their way to now be shrunken, and it ends up that the dog makes its way to the attic, and from the sounds of the dog, they're like, "Oh my god, he is so loud!" Because of course, them being so small now, like certain noises are going to be drastically different. So Zelensky makes his way home after this conference because it's lunchtime, I'm assuming, and so the kids end up spotting this couch. So like, oh my god, hey, like I guess the couch shrunk too. So Zelensky makes his way back up to the attic as the baseball has now gotten off this machine and has now gone somewhere into the attic floor. So the kids realize that they need to take this couch and adjust it and hope that the couch is a big enough thing from off the floor for them to be like, hey, dad, hey. So they realize that no matter how hard they scream, like their dad can't hear them because of the distance between the two of them. Like it's basically like a bug and a man trying to have a conversation with one another. It won't work. So Zelensky, who is going through his stuff, is all of a sudden bumping into one of these items that are hanging from the ceiling. So he is getting so frustrated because of this machine that he grabs this piece from the ceiling, rips it out, and just starts smashing this shrinking machine. realizing how much time that he has wasted going on and putting this whole machine together, and everyone just laughing at him. And Nick in the background telling his father, like, oh no, the machine works, Dad, the machine works, you're breaking the machine. So, after Zelensky has gone on to wreck the machine, and there's a number of parts that are all on the floor, he then is to want to sweep up the floor with this broom. So, the kids are now running for their lives, going on and hopping over these screws and all of these items, trying to get away from this broom. And that forces the kids to then latch onto this broom that is to have also gone and had all this dust and all these things collected into this one dust scooper thing. I don't know exactly what it's called, but I'm just calling it a scooper thing. So Zelensky puts this thing into the trash, and the kids fall within the trash, and he ends up bringing it outside. So the kids, from more than likely finding a screw or a number of items, end up poking a hole through this garbage bag. They end up opening it. They end up seeing that they're completely in their backyard. And they realize, like, oh my god, this is going to take forever. Like, we might as well try as quickly as possible to get going here, because this may take a week for us to get back to our home. So there is to be this one thing of grass that ends up to like become their slide. So they start sliding off this one thread of grass, and one by one, like, people start like, oh, what should we do? Like there's kind of pondering back and forth. So Ron and Russ are, of course, yelling here and arguing, and this leads them to hear of a butterfly kind of batting its wings, flying, and they start freaking out. They're like, "Oh my god, what was that?" And they're like, "Yeah, like, we should be very much concerned about um, what we're gonna go through here. Like, there's all kinds of stuff that can just be in our backyard that we don't even realize." And also, like, Nick is going on and on his calculator, just like, "Oh my god, like, the wingspan of this butterfly is like 64 feet high," and it's very funny. So Diane makes her way home to talk to Zelensky, and it's telling him, it's like, oh my god, like, she says that she's like a realtor, and she is to have sold this big house for the Borensteins, and at some point she's gonna go on and need Zelensky to just give the Borensteins some stuff while she's away. So we would also have Zelensky that is telling uh, Diane, his wife, it's like, you know what, like, I think that whole machine, me shrinking things, like, I think it's a bust. Like, I think I need to just go on and just have a change. I just think I need to do something new. And Diane starts looking around the house as it's in shambles. It's like, wow, like, we're really going through a change here. So as the kids make their way through this backyard, eventually Russ is assembled upon a thing that freaks him out. And he screams, and he goes on to, at some point, finally realize that this monstrous thing that he's screaming at is just some dinosaur that Nick left in this backyard. We're going to find that Nick is to have dropped and lost a lot of things in this backyard, it seems. But let's go on and let's move on here. So the kids make their way through this seemingly waterish like environment, and Ron is stating that it's some river, when logically Russ is saying, like, well, it's probably like the dog's urine, and we're thinking that it's some river. So Amy's like, well, I don't know what it is, but I'm not going and swimming through that. So we have the kids realizing that there's a possibility that they can go on and whistle for Quark, the dog. Because, like, if the parents or anybody human can't go on and hear them because they're so far from the actual ground as far as distance is concerned with their ears, that maybe the dog being lower to the ground could have them justify, like, the dog being able to hear them, and also, like, with the dog having, like, that special uh like whistling toy thing that would get its attention, and it can only be heard by dogs and animals and whatever. So they end up trying to whistle, and they start to look around and notice that Russ can't whistle. So they start to make fun of him, like, ha ha, he can't whistle. So Amy tells Russ, is like, well, hey, like, why can't you just go on and whistle? It's just kind of putting your lips together and blowing. And Russ is like, he can't whistle. Heaven forbid I can whistle. There we go. It's been a long day. I've been talking a lot. So, there we go. So Nick is to try to figure out how far he is from the actual house. So he decides that he's looking up at this flower. So he's like, hey, I'll just start climbing this flower. And so Ron says, he's like, oh, I'll climb too. And then Ross looks at Amy. He's like, oh, I'll climb also. So while the three kids are trying to go on and get the attention of the dog, we would come to find that the dog and the neighbor's cat are having this kind of spat. And with that happening, all of a sudden, this rockets the flower to go back and forth, swinging. So much so that is to go on and have Nick go flying off of this flower to go onto this other one. And so he ends up diving right into this pollen. And Amy's like, oh my God, Nick, get away from that flower. Like, you're very allergic to pollen. And Nick realizes that there's so much of the pollen that there's no way that it can go on and actually harm him or kill him here, because it's such a large amount of it that, like, there's no way that it can get to him. So we have Diane kind of just wondering where her kids are, so much so that she turns to May. And so it's like, hey, like, do you know where my kids are? No. Like, do you know where my kids are? So May is even going on and talking to Thompson about this. So we would go on and have Nick, that is to have this bee come onto this flower. And so now Nick is in fear that this bee is going to take him or kill him or whatever. So Russ is to go on and hop on top of this bee. And so both now Nick and both Russ are flying around on this bee. So that leaves both Amy and both Ron to now be together. And there's some funny bits of dialogue here between the two of them. Like, we obviously have the two of them that don't really like one another, but eventually Amy is to tell Ron at some point, hey man, like, my dad, after this experiment, like, goes well, like, he's gonna make $1 million. And Ron is just like, we know, Amy, like, I do love you and Nick, like, you're my sister and brother. You know I love you guys, right? Just kind of buttering them up. It's very funny. So Nick and Russ are hanging on for dear life onto this bee. So both Diane and Zelensky are talking, and, like, Zelensky looks at Thompson, who's just getting all this gear together, And we all of a sudden have this bee make its way to Thompson, and Thompson is just kind of figuring out a way to just kind of shoo it away. The bee makes it to Zelensky, and Zelensky is taking this bat and trying to swat it. Diane goes back to look at Zelensky, and he's like, "Oh, there's a bee here. I was trying to get it with the bat." And Diane's like, "Sure, all right." So we again have more banter with Amy and Ron here, and so like again, it's just more arguing. It's more just the same old same. Like, and eventually they'll call a truce between the two of them, and it's a funny just kind of. It's very funny. Um, but anyways, we have Zelensky that makes his way back to his attic. He then comes to find that the thinking chair is to be miniaturized, and he looks at it and he's like, "Oh my god, is that my chair?" And he then starts to put it together and is like, "Oh my god, like my machine works." But then he also realizes that his kids are probably shrunken now. So he starts to backtrack and is thinking like, okay, like they might have gotten swept up by the broom. Maybe they're in that trash bag. That trash bag has a hole in it now. Oh my god, they must be in the backyard. So Zelensky starts walking into the backyard, but then he realizes like, oh my god, I need to just start to jump from uh thing to thing onto my fence because like my kids could be somewhere in this backyard. So he starts hopping and hopping, and so Thompson looks at him and is like, "You weird people." So Nick and Russ are alone, and Ron and Amy are alone. They're calling for one another, trying to figure out where one another are. So Zelensky is going on with these stilts, and he has these binoculars and this weird helmet on, and he's trying to possibly like see if he can find the kids within doing this. But bizarrely, with these stilts on, he accidentally grabs this hose that has this attachment on it. So while he keeps fiddling with that, all of a sudden the nozzle, the twisting thing that can turn on the water accidentally turns on. And all of a sudden this turns on this sprinkler system that then all of a sudden has both Amy and Ron scrambling because of the splashing of water with these sprinklers that are so massive that are hitting the ground. So this impacts Ron and Amy. This also impacts Russ and Nick. So they start running around. They're scrambling like crazy. So we would then have Zelensky that is a trip on this hose, and he ends up falling, and the only thing that he can think to break his fall is this clothing line because again he doesn't want to fall on the ground because he could crunch and smush his kids. So he's desperately like just kind of clinging on to this clothing line. So we would have the Borensteins make their way to see Zelensky now on his clothing line, and they're just like, okay, this guy is weird. So Zelensky is telling the Borensteins to not go on the grass. So we have all four kids meet at this one spot, and Amy is to fall, and she's to fall in this bit of water, and like she is in a very much like quicksand like spot, and she starts to drown. So Ross is to jump in after her, and he ends up like jumping onto this thing of leaf to then go and jump into this water. So Ross ends up finding Amy and drags her out, and he starts doing CPR. And the funny thing of it is like they're like, well, how did you know how to do CPR? Nick asked this question, and Russ says he learned CPR from French class, and it's like, and like, well, I guess like if he doesn't know about fishing or football, at least he knows about kissing, from French class. So Zelensky turns the water off, and so Diane ends up going on to make a phone call, and there's no one home. And Zelensky is going through the grass now, hanging off of this one contraption that on one side has his TV, and on the other has him, that is just kind of hanging, and he's just kind of going through the grass, trying to see if he can find where the kids are in this backyard. So we then have both May and Thompson. And Thompson is going on and trying to do something with his fishing equipment, and he ends up getting some of it stuck to his hand, and he's trying to figure out how to get it off his hand. So a RV appears in front of Thompson's home, and a guy by the name of, oh my god, I know it's the wife is Gloria. Uh, Don. There we go. Don ends up making his way to be like, hey man, like, yeah, let's get going. Yeah, let's get them fish. Yeah, all right. Yeah, this and that. So Gloria ends up coming out with her dog and is like, oh, hey, yeah. So we have Thompson that goes to Don and is telling him that they can't make the fishing trip because May is having some plumbing issues, let's just say. So Don is like, well, hey, like, plumbing issues didn't bother you before. Like, you would do anything to have gone on this trip. And plus, also, you have that, like, that $80 non refundable, like, retainer thing for this trip. And Thompson is like, well, I know about that, but, like, but my wife is just really sick. And so Don is like, well, okay, all right, man. Well, like, so, like, if anything, they have this kind of weird, just little, like, wave handshake thing together, and then they leave. So Thompson is so upset by the fact that his kids aren't here. He's like, an $80 non-refundable thing is now uh, like I hope those kids are really in trouble. So we then would go on and have the four kids, and here's where Amy turns to Ron. It's like, okay, truce, and then he and gets him in the hand. So the kids have to go on and further realize that they have to just keep on trucking here. So, and also Nick is still asking. I think this is where Nick is asking about the whole French class thing. So we'd have Wayne here that is going through and microscoping this blades of grass, trying to figure out where his kids are. Like, you would have thought he would have found them by accident by now, but I guess not. So we would have the four kids that stumble upon an oatmeal cake. And so, like, oh my god, because they're thinking about all the food that they could possibly have. Like, we have Amy, who is desperate for a sundae right now. So they stumble upon this oatmeal pie that Nick had just kind of left over. So they're like, oh my god. So they start, like, grabbing pieces of it and start chowing down because they're so hungry. And all of a sudden, this ant appears on top of it. And they're just like, oh no, what are we going to do? So, like, at first, they were going on and, like, just wanting to just kind of bat it away. and run from it. But then eventually they realize, like, wait a minute, like ants, like they move really fast. Like if anything, if we just kind of jump on this ant, like we can go on and like make it back to our house in no time. So they all like Ron, Nick, and Russ like all start jumping onto this ant, and one by one they either get flung off or like they're just having problems riding this ant. So we have Amy who grabs a piece of the oatmeal pie and she just starts shoving it in front of the ant, and the ant starts following her. But then Amy realizes, like, oh my god, this is actually working. So she's like, guys, a little help here. And they're like, oh my god, it's actually working. So Zelensky is to be again combing through the grass, and his dog ends up grabbing on to the other half of this mechanism, and he grabs the rope and he starts twisting and twisting and twisting. And so by the time that Zelensky can finally convince his dog to stop what he's doing and let go, all of a sudden the mechanism starts swinging around so quickly and so absurdly fast that Zelensky all of a sudden goes flying into the neighbor's yard, and both the Thompsons are looking on of like, God, like what a weird guy. So it seems that the kids had figured out a way to jerry rig this stick and the oatmeal pie thing right in front of the ant to just kind of force him like a Twinkie on a rope to keep a person like running in an exercise thing as a joke mechanism. Like they figured out that this is a way to get this ant to just kind of start going where they want. So they start to get like having all the kids just kind of on this ant because they realize that the ant can carry 4 times its weight. So Diane finally goes on and she calls the cops. We have the Thompsons who also call the cops. So the cops end up taking reports from the family, and then they also realize that the Zelenskys right next door have also called the cops for missing kids. And like, okay, this is weird. So here's where finally Zelensky is to have to break it to Diane of like, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, the movie title. So we would then have Diana's like, well, hey, I just called the cops, like, so Zelensky's like, oh my god, yeah, the cops are here. So we now come to find that this has been such a long day that now the ant is just kind of dragging the kids along with this kind of leaf thing attached as a bed. So they're just kind of getting dragged now. And so Ron is to tell like Andy the ant, it's like, hey man, like you really deserve this like bit of meal here. Like you've had a long day. Here you go. So they're also just kind of tempted to just kind of let the ant just kind of let him go and go back to doing what he was doing. But the more that they just try to tell him like, okay, hey man, you're free, like the ant just keeps hanging on to this group. And Ron's like, well, yeah, I can't keep you because there's no way it's going to work. So we then have both Diane and both Zelensky who are now on this kind of weird mechanism thing, and they're starting to comb through the grass. So Thompson is to be like in such a worry that he is to go on and start puffing up, and he all of a sudden starts to see both the parents kind of combing through the grass, and he's like, oh my god. So he chucks his cigarette and goes back in, and the kids find the cigarette, and they're like, what the heck was that? So they come to find that, of course, that it's their that Russ and Ron realize that it's their father's brand, and he only has cigarettes when he's really worried. So they're like, ugh, like, what are we putting our dad through? So, but they realize that they can kind of take this little stick like thing and start to make torches. So, like, all the more good thing to have during nighttime, so they can kind of see where they're going. So, Diane is to go on and look at the neighbor's home, and she realizes to to Zelensky that they need to break it uh, to May and Thomas that like their kids have possibly been shrunk. So they pull off the ripcord and they go to both May and Thompson and they break it to them. And how they do it is they give this microscope that is to have this couch in it. And Thompson is just like, okay, so you have so you have doll furniture that's supposed to convince me that my kids have been shrunken. So, like, if anything, like they're trying to bring up some real evidence here, but like it doesn't really seem that Thomas is 100% buying it. But then again, May ends up going on is to be looking out at the backyard, and Thompson ends up turning on the back light, and May is like, "Hey, so you really do believe?" And Thompson is just like, "Well, like electricity tonight, it's cheap. like, like, come on, like, don't make me forced to say it, but like, hey, maybe he's right about this." So the kids are to go on and have these torches making their way further into this yard to find this Lego piece. It's big enough to house a number of people to sleep within it. So they're like, all right, like, so we're not going to sleep on the ground tonight. We're going to sleep in this puzzle piece. So one and the other start getting into these puzzle pieces and start sleeping. And we would then have to figure out where Amy's going to sleep. Because she would, of course, need her own little spot. So it's kind of funny how both Amy and Russ, like, Russ is just like, hey, are you going to feel warm tonight? Like, hey, uh, like, do you want anybody to just kind of keep you warm, kind of thing? And so Amy's just like, no, Russ, I'll be fine. So, like, it's kind of really fun conversation between the two of them, and they're kind of teasing the fact that they're probably going to end up together, as well as eventually they're going to soon kiss here. So, Zelensky is starting to look through his house, realizing he needs to go on and have this clock be a piece that he can use for his shrinking machine. So, both Diane and Zelensky are going on and just kind of looking out at their backyard, just realizing that the kids should be out there somewhere. And so, as Zelensky is to take the entire night to be working on this machine, so tiringly so that he falls asleep next to it. And Diane looks at Zelensky and says, like, I love you, Wayne Zelensky. As she looks out in the yard, she realizes, like, well, hopefully they're safe. And then also, like, hopefully, like, since Amy is with Russ, hopefully they don't do anything. Hopefully they don't try anything. So Amy and Russ start to talking, and Amy starts talking to Russ about, well, hey, like, why haven't you really like talked to me? Like, why haven't you really like been around at school and found me there and this and that? And like Russ is just like, I don't know, like so. This is where, of course, the two of them like have this kind of heart to heart, and like it really shows that they do really like one another, and they kiss. Then all of a sudden, there's this big, huge, massive scorpion monster that makes its way down to the puzzle piece to want to get some lunch or some dinner, some late night dinner. So we would see that the scorpion is to make its way to this puzzle piece, and some of the kids start to get a distance away, but then Ron is still stuck in his piece, and the scorpion keeps trying to get at him uh, with his little grabber like thing. So the ant comes back to the rescue. It's like, all right, the good dinosaur, if we're going with Jurassic Park like terms. If the scorpion is the raptor from Jurassic Park, then the T Rex is to be the ant here. Da, 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 da. Like that's what I was thinking, just straight up, just Jurassic Park. So the ant and the scorpion are facing it off, and we also have Russ is grabbing the stick and trying to fling it and hit uh, this scorpion to kind of get him to go away. So Russ ends up jumping from off of his puzzle piece to landing on the ground, but still he's just in a fear here. So the ant faces off against the scorpion to create even more distance from the puzzle piece here. So the ant is no match to the scorpion. And so the kids realize that, and so they're like, hey, like he was trying to help us, so we're gonna turn around and we're gonna help him in kind. So they start grabbing these sticks and like, yeah, we're gonna get him. So the scorpion ends up going and taking its tail and launching into the ant, possibly thinking that the ant is probably going to die here. So we would have the kids starting to fend off this scorpion, and like at the end of it, the scorpion leaves. And so we now have Ron who's looking at the ant. It's like, oh my god, you tried to save me. Like, I hope he's gonna be okay. Just really, just this fun little, nice little tender moment. So Zelensky spent all night putting this machine together. We already went over this scene. So the following day, uh, the kids, it seems, are to have like these kind of weird sticks and all of these things just to, I guess, put a like some kind of perimeter around their puzzle piece so they can all try and just like sleep together in this one hole. So they get up and they all start to realize that they need to all go to the bathroom. So like Ron ends up telling Amy, it's like, well, hey, like we're gonna go here, you can go there. So here's where Tommy makes his way to this backyard because he's gonna go and he's gonna cut the grass here. So Tommy starts putting this machine together to get ready and to start cutting this grass, and the kids are to eventually go on and hear the lawnmower making its way through the yard. So, like, oh my god, what is that noise? So, all of a sudden, they start end up getting sucked into almost the lawnmower. And so, every one of them are starting to hold on to the other. Like, they're grabbing one another's legs as they're just kind of holding on for dear life here, realizing, like, hey, like we're not gonna let Nick die, we're not gonna let Ron die, we're not gonna let Russ die, we're not gonna let Amy die. Like we're all just gonna hang on for dear life here as this mower is just kind of going by. So both Diane and both Zelensky are like starting to look at this shrinking machine, but then all of a sudden they hear in the background like, "Hey, what's that noise? Oh, it's a lawnmower. Why is there a lawnmower going on?" And so all of a sudden they look in their backyard and they're like, "Oh my god, Tommy! Oh my god, you're starting this." So the two parents scramble back to Tommy and they're yelling, Tommy, Tommy. And like Tommy is having these headphones beyond also him mowing the lawn. So like you can barely hear anything while you're mowing the lawn. And let alone if you're wearing headphones on top of that, you can't hear anything. You really can't. So we would eventually have the kids who, after their endeavors of uh, going on and going up against this lawnmower, and the Zelensky's figuring out a way to stop Tommy from mowing the grass. I keep saying glass. I'm sorry. Uh, so the kids end up realizing that they're like, oh my god, we almost died, and they start hugging. So, but they also realize that they're so close to home now, and they're hoping at some point that like Quark ends up getting released so they can latch onto him and just have him carry them back all the way to the house. So Quark ends up getting in a spat with this cat again, but the cat leaves as he barks. So Quark makes his way all the way to the kitchen table where Zelensky is now having this bowl of cereal and Cheerios is of course the breakfast of choice, I guess. So Zelensky is starting to eat his breakfast with the dog being ever so close, which ends up having Nick fall into his own father's bowl of Cheerios, and the rest of the kids go from Quark's head down to the table, and they're like, "Oh my god, hey, 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 we're here!" So Nick is now swimming through the Cheerios, hoping that his father won't eat him. Don't eat me! This is such a gross like thing. And immediately, whenever I am to just be thinking of this and I eat cereal, it just makes me ugh. Uh, but so, anyways, Nick goes on into or Nick goes into this one spoonful of Cheerios, and luckily Zelensky is so close to almost eating his own son, and the dog ends up biting Zelensky's knee to then have Zelensky just stop and be like, "What the heck is going on?" But then he realizes that he notices his son within the spoonful of Cheerios, and he's like, "Oh my god!" And so that's when he sees his son. He's like, "Oh my god, Nick!" And then he starts to see the rest of the kids all on the table. So he's like, "Oh my god, all right, yeah, all right." So we figure this out. So Diane and Zelensky brings back both Thompson and Diane to then have them like, okay, like now that we have the kids back, let's figure out a way for them to um, to become big again. So they're trying to figure out the machine, and like Zelensky's like, well, I don't know if like this experiment is gonna go that well, and Nick ends up trying to yell at his dad about the whole baseball, and they're like, what were they yelling? And so they're trying to like perform this charade, and it looks like okay, somebody's pitching and someone's catching. Like, is it baseball? And so they're like, oh yeah, it's baseball. It's like, all right. So Zelensky then realizes that it all came down to the baseball and having this machine work. So they then test the machine, and Thompson is like, "Oh no! Like you're not gonna be trying this on my kids first, because I don't want them to be like exploding fruit. So you're gonna try it on me." So Zelensky fires up the machine and shrinks Thomas, and then gets him back to normal size. Luckily, both things easily work somehow. So we have May, who's looking at Thomas as this small little thing. It's like, "Oh my god!" Like you're so courageous and just so brave. And so Thompson almost falls off the thing that he was sitting on. So they turn around and they're like, okay, since that test worked out, now we can go on and we can resize the kids. It was also kind of funny because we would come to find that Thomas was to try to put his hat back on, and his head was smaller, and he's like, "What the heck? This hat fit before. What's going on?" So as the kids that are on the spoon be put onto this one piece of furniture to fire up this machine again, Ross ends up talking to Amy and saying like, "Well, hey, like if we do get on Shrunk again, like, do you think that you'll go out with me to this dance?" And Amy's like, "Well, like, can you dance?" And Russ is like, "Ugh." And Amy's like, "Yeah, we'll go to the dance together." It's like, "All right, great, all right." So Kid Vi's back to normal again, and so the kids are all, well, luckily I was almost done. So yeah, I have to take more time and edit these videos together. All right. So, like I was going on and saying, so the kids are hugging the parents here. And so Nick tells his father, it's like, yeah, like I told you about the baseball. And Zelensky's like, yeah, like you figured it out, buddy. And Amy's hugging Diana. It's like, hey, are you and Dad okay? And Diana's like, yeah, like we're great. And Russ and Ron are talking to the parents, and Ron is like, well, yeah, like Mom and Dad, I really did want to go on to this fishing trip. Like I didn't think that you guys wanted me to not want to go on there. And Thompson's like, no, hey, like, nah, it's okay. Like as long as you're kind of just back here and you're alive. And Ross is like, yeah, Dad, like about me and football and this and that, and like Thomas is just, no, it's fine. Like everything's fine. So like they're all happy that they're all back together, hugs all around, and by the very tail end of this, we come to find that Zelensky like ends up shaking it out with Thomas at the end of all this to just be like, hey man, like I freaking hate your guts, but you brought my kids back to me. So like we come around to a Thanksgiving feast, it seems, and we have Zelensky that is to have this massive turkey at this table, and they're trying to figure out how to cut this turkey. And Thompson ends up turning to Zelensky. He's like, "Hey, maybe I'll get my chainsaw, and we'll cut this down." Like having a really good joke and just kind of finishing up this film. So yeah, like we have to assume that Amy and Russ had that dance, and let's go on and just kind of wrap up this review. Man, I was so close to being done, but oh well. Like, for whatever reason, like my app right now is just having a lot of problems, and I always just kind of occur like, and I worry the longer and longer I talk that it might just be some problem that arises that forces me to then have to turn around and make this an even longer process. But if anything, the only good thing coming out of this is this review is done. And finally, because a number of people in my community had voted for this movie, so luckily I was able to do this review. And then hopefully I will go on and turn around and at some point tonight, go on and be able to watch Deadpool and Wolverine and get that also. Probably not, like, I'm really thinking that probably by the time that I get this done, I'm probably going to end up watching the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, but I don't know how much energy I'm going to have left to actually review that film. But I really also need to get to it as quickly as humanly possible, realizing that, yeah, people are going to want that review as quickly as, because the quickest one is probably going to get the most views, probably, for that one. But maybe people just like that movie anyways and just want to hear my opinions. Either way, I'm going to get that out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.